On a freezing winter night, billionaire Ethan Blackwood made a decision that shocked everyone around him. Instead of donating money, he hired a homeless woman as his maid. His family mocked him, his employees questioned his judgment, and the media called it another billionaire publicity stunt. But only a few days later, the woman revealed a heartbreaking secret she had hidden for years, a truth that connected their lives in a way no one could have imagined. What happened next changed not only Ethan's future but the lives of everyone around him forever. Ethan Blackwood, a 55-year-old billionaire, owned one of the world's largest technology companies. He lived in a breathtaking mansion overlooking the ocean, surrounded by luxury that most people could only dream about. Yet despite his wealth and success, his home felt painfully empty. Every evening he returned to silence, carrying a loneliness that money had never been able to cure. Across the city, 28-year-old Grace Carter slept on a worn bench near an old church. She wrapped herself in a thin blanket against the freezing wind. Once a respected schoolteacher, she had lost everything after a series of heartbreaking tragedies. Still, she refused to beg, believing that dignity was the last treasure no one could steal from her. One rainy morning, Ethan's car stopped at a traffic light near the church. He noticed Grace carefully sharing her only piece of bread with a hungry little boy before quietly walking away herself without eating. That simple act of kindness touched Ethan more deeply than any charity gala he had ever attended. He couldn't stop thinking about her. The next day, Ethan returned with his driver and offered Grace a job as a live-in maid at his mansion. Grace hesitated, believing it was a cruel joke. Ethan calmly explained that he wasn't offering pity. He was offering honest work, respect, and a fresh start. After a long silence, Grace accepted with grateful tears in her eyes. When Ethan introduced Grace to his family, they were furious. His younger brother called her a gold digger, while his wealthy relatives laughed at her worn clothes and humble appearance. Grace lowered her eyes but remained silent. Ethan firmly defended her, reminding everyone that a person's character mattered far more than expensive clothes or social status. Grace worked harder than anyone expected. She cleaned every room with care, prepared warm meals, and even comforted elderly staff members who were often ignored by others. She treated everyone with respect regardless of their position. Slowly, the mansion felt warmer, not because of luxury, but because genuine kindness had finally entered its walls. While organizing an old storage room, Grace discovered a dusty wooden box hidden behind forgotten furniture. Inside were faded photographs, children's drawings, and handwritten letters. Before opening everything, she quietly closed the lid again, sensing they carried deeply personal memories. She placed the box safely on Ethan's desk without saying a single word. That evening, Ethan opened the box and was overwhelmed by emotion. The photographs belonged to his late wife and their young daughter, who had disappeared years earlier during a terrible accident. Since that day, Ethan had buried himself in work, hoping success would silence his grief. Instead, every memory reopened old wounds. Over the next few days, Ethan noticed something unusual about Grace. She knew little details about his late wife that almost no stranger could know. She recognized an old lullaby, remembered the family's favorite flower, and reacted emotionally whenever she saw certain photographs. Ethan began wondering whether fate had brought Grace into his life for a reason. Late one night, Ethan accidentally saw Grace crying while holding an old silver locket. Inside was a faded photograph that made his heart stop. It showed his late wife standing beside a young woman who looked exactly like Grace. With trembling hands, Ethan quietly whispered, "Who are you, and how did you know my family?" The answer would change both of their lives forever. Grace quietly held the silver locket in her trembling hands. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at Ethan. She whispered that years ago she had been the closest friend of Ethan's late wife, Emily. They had grown up together, shared dreams, and promised to protect each other forever. One tragic night destroyed everything they had planned. Grace explained that the terrible accident everyone believed had taken Emily's life was far more complicated than anyone knew. She had survived for several hours after the crash. Before losing consciousness, Emily begged Grace to protect a small envelope containing an important truth. Grace kept that promise, even though it cost her everything she owned. Grace carefully opened her old backpack and removed a weathered envelope she had protected for years. Ethan's hands shook as he unfolded the letter. It was written in Emily's handwriting. She explained that someone close to the family had been secretly stealing company money and had caused the accident to silence her forever. As Ethan finished reading the letter, one name stood out. His own younger brother, Daniel, had betrayed him. Daniel had secretly manipulated company accounts for years and feared Emily would expose the truth. Ethan refused to believe it at first, but every sentence matched strange events he had ignored for years. Grace reached into another envelope filled with old bank statements, photographs, and legal documents Emily had collected before the accident. Together they revealed a pattern of fraud, bribery, and corruption. Grace had spent years protecting this evidence while living on the streets because powerful people had threatened her life if she ever spoke. Ethan confronted Daniel inside the company headquarters. At first, Daniel denied every accusation. But when Ethan placed Emily's letter and the evidence on the table, Daniel's confidence disappeared. The board members watched in complete silence as the truth finally came into the light after so many painful years. Authorities immediately launched an investigation. Daniel and several corrupt executives were arrested for financial crimes and conspiracy. News spread across the country. Reporters praised Grace's courage for protecting the evidence despite years of suffering. For the first time in many years, she felt that Emily's final wish had finally been honored. Instead of simply thanking Grace with money, Ethan offered her something much greater. He asked her to become director of the Blackwood Foundation, a charity dedicated to helping homeless families rebuild their lives through education, employment, and dignity. Grace accepted with tears, knowing her painful journey now had real purpose. The mansion slowly transformed into a home again. Employees smiled more often. Charity projects replaced extravagant parties. Ethan realized that true leadership meant serving people rather than impressing them. Grace's kindness inspired everyone around her, proving that one compassionate heart could change an entire community. Standing beside Emily's memorial garden, Ethan thanked Grace for keeping a promise that had lasted many difficult years. Grace placed fresh white roses beneath the memorial and whispered that Emily had always believed goodness would win in the end. Ethan finally felt peace replacing the grief he had carried for so long. A week later, Ethan announced a new mission for the Blackwood Foundation. Instead of simply giving donations, the foundation would provide homeless people with jobs, housing, education, and counseling. Grace stood beside him during the announcement. The audience applauded, realizing that compassion creates lasting change when it offers dignity instead of temporary charity. One afternoon, Grace returned to the church where Ethan had first seen her. The same little boy she had shared bread with was still there, frightened and alone. This time she smiled, held out her hand, and brought him to the foundation. Watching from a distance, Ethan realized kindness always comes back to the person who gives it. The boy's widowed mother soon arrived at the foundation in tears. She had been searching everywhere for work and feared losing her son forever. Grace helped her find a safe home and a stable job. Their joyful reunion reminded everyone that one act of compassion can rescue an entire family from despair. Months passed, and Ethan's once silent mansion felt alive again. Employees laughed together, charity volunteers visited daily, and children from the foundation often filled the gardens with happiness. The empty halls that had once echoed with loneliness were now filled with hope, proving that love, not wealth, is what truly makes a house feel like home. News of Ethan and Grace's work spread across the world. Television programs, newspapers, and social media shared their inspiring journey. Millions were moved by the story of a billionaire who chose compassion over pride and a homeless woman whose courage uncovered the truth. Their story inspired countless people to help those in need. At an international humanitarian awards ceremony, Grace was invited onto the stage. She accepted the award with humility and dedicated it to every homeless person who had ever been ignored or judged. Looking into the audience, she said, "Never judge someone by where they sleep. Judge them by the kindness they carry." Driving home after the ceremony, Ethan reflected on everything that had happened. He had spent years believing success was measured by money, power, and prestige. Grace had taught him a different truth. The richest person is the one whose life brings hope to others. It was the most valuable lesson he had ever learned. Together, Ethan and Grace opened the Emily Hope Center, named in honor of Ethan's late wife. The center provided shelter, education, healthcare, and employment opportunities for struggling families. Standing before the entrance, Ethan smiled through tears, knowing Emily's dream of helping others had finally become a lasting reality. One quiet evening, Grace admitted something she had never told anyone. There had been moments when fear almost convinced her to destroy Emily's letter forever. But she remembered Emily's final words, "Truth may be delayed, but it should never be buried." Ethan thanked her for protecting not only the evidence but also his faith in humanity. As the sun set behind the Emily Hope Center, Ethan and Grace watched families begin new lives filled with hope. Ethan softly said, "The day I hired you, I thought I was saving one homeless woman. I never imagined you would save me instead." Grace smiled warmly as children laughed nearby. Sometimes the greatest miracles arrive disguised as ordinary people, and one act of kindness can change countless lives forever. Moral of the story: never judge a person by their appearance or circumstances. Kindness, honesty, and courage have the power to reveal hidden truths, heal broken hearts, and transform lives. The greatest wealth is not measured by money but by the lives you uplift and the hope you give to others.